Rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. Don't force a thing too much. You've got to let it happen, but then you've got to nurture the environment so that things will happen quickly. Go with the flow, so to speak, and then it will guide you in many instances.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to Live Into Your Brilliance, the place where we go on deep explorations to find the experiments and the insights that can show us the brilliance that we already are and allow us to live the lives that we love. We all perceive problems in our lives, right? And for most of us, our approach to solving a problem is to focus intently on it and, if anything, to try and force a solution. Well, today's special guest, Jett Yang, offers a completely alternative way to think about problem solving. He has had a stellar career in the drinks industry. Before now, he's working and leading an organization who are pioneering a brand new way of road building that can quite literally transform the world as it looks today. Jett is one of the most curious and insightful people ever. And when he talks about problem solving, he talks about it from the journey of his life, which has been anything but linear. And he shows us why forcing ruins what's kind of ripe to open up to us in our world. And he kind of points us back to a place that we know we often look, which is to our intuition, and tells us once again just how life and work begins to change when we learn to let it flow. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Jett is just the most wise character that you can possibly meet. And so let's dive in. What is it that you're seeing, or the insight that perhaps is most alive in you, or the myth that feels like the one that you want to blow up, that you would love to whisper into the ears of the planet, that you'd be like, oh, this is what I'm seeing right now that I feel has got the greatest opportunity? Where would you like to start with that?
Well, perhaps I could start with a quote. And during our time together, you've probably heard enough quotes from me because sometimes it's like a lighthouse. It reminds you. It's an Einstein quote, and he said, "You can't fix a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it." And a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve for, we're taking the same approach that created the problems, and so many times. It looks like it may be solving the problem, but when you look at that solution through a wider boundary lens, you're disrupting and messing up a lot of other things. And so it's like staring down a emissions pipe of an electric vehicle saying, "Hey, look, guys, zero carbon." But they neglect to see the process, carbon and energy and materials that is involved in making the batteries uh, and the car and continually feeding it electricity. So I think when we chop things up into manageable bite sizes and we use those as metrics for success, we're often making things worse. Sometimes the solutions are the problems, and that's one of the myths that we are unearthing. And you know, it's all great to be sustainable minded, net zero, all that's great, but increasingly those concepts have become so hollowed out that what does it really mean? And is that the problem, or is that a symptom of something greater? So it makes us, well, we have to go a step further. We have to see what is at the root of this. If we are just looking for what is the next attractive bandage that we could produce and market, is we're not really looking at what the big difference that we can make that could have a positive, lasting impact.
Mm. I love that. I love that because I think we've spoken about it before, like informally, Jett, like at the bar. Um, is when you, and I think we've mentioned it on this podcast before, but when you consider that some of the the consciousness, the place from which we create an experience, and by virtue of that, in some instances, a problem, um, trying to solve it from that same source is sometimes a fool's errand. Um, and so, to your point, altering your consciousness, operating from a different place of awareness in order to tackle some of the uh, the problems we've created in the world is a very powerful thing. But unfortunately, I think, and we actually had another guest on here a couple of weeks ago, B. Alinka, who basically, was pointing to exactly this. You get into this vicious loop where it becomes a circular thing where the problems you create are bandaged by an additional set of problems, rather than taking a step back and looking at it through the lens of your wisdom, and understanding how to treat the symptom, and operate from a very different place. So I love that sentiment, and I also understand it in the context that you're putting it out there, because what you're laying down, if you pardon the pun, is is something very different. You're approaching a major problem from a very different consciousness, and I think that's very exciting, and I'm sure that's going to come out more during this episode.
Yeah. Sometimes when I get into a kind of a slump, uh, what I try to do is I go to museums because I want to see something beautiful. It kind of recharges my batteries. The like a deep level kind of a recharge. And what you just said, Mark, reminds me of this painting by William Blake called Jacob's Ladder. And Jacob's Ladder from the Bible has been painted in so many different ways, but he was the only one that painted that in a spiral. And so uh, instead of a linear pathway to heaven, it's a spiral. So if you're looking at from the top, you keep going around in circles. And that is the definition of insanity. But actually, if you look at it from a slightly different angle, you see a wave. So you may come to the same spot again, but from a different plane, from a different vantage point. So what some people may consider false starts, actually, depending on what plane it takes you, you can you are making a lot of progress. And so, instead of a exact circular, if you see it giving you progress, like Jacob's Ladder in William Blake's fashion, that could be a really, really wonderful and amazing thing.
Ta Taking that, Jet, like, I'm kinda going back to the quote and just listening to you both talk, and I'm like, I'm gonna use your kind of the piece you talked about with electric cars. Um, when I chat to my dad about electric cars, interesting, I'm like, "Oh, when do you think, Dad, you might move from combustion engine to electric car?" And he's like, I don't think I'm gonna do that. I don't see the point." He's like, when you think about electric cars, and then he goes, everything else. So when you think about the batteries and the production, is like, I'm not sure that that's the way to go. Now, part of me, when I talk to him, I'm like, well, there's a risk there that we end up being passive, and we go, because now we're saying, well, the electric cars is not necessarily the solution, because if we start to then extrapolate it out, is it just a band aid on the problem? What I'm really, and then just thinking about what you said there about Jacob's Ladder, what I'm interested to get your take on is when Einstein says you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created the problem. I think where people get stuck is they go, yep, okay, like that makes sense. But how do I change levels of consciousness? How do I kind of, if I see this problem, like, what's where's that pointing us towards? Um, because that Jacob's Ladder picture to me kind of captures it beautifully, which is it's sometimes just you can't quite tell like what level you're at, and like, am I making progress? Am I engaging with a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it, or am I actually looking at it from a different vantage point? So I'm kind of just really curious to dig into it and go, yeah. So where what's that really pointing us toward, and what's been your experience of that? Perhaps where you've seen, like this is where I jumped levels of consciousness and saw something entirely differently.
Mm-mm-mm. Right. That's funny because that's exactly directly related to the epiphany that I had at our gathering. So, you know, without getting philosophical about consciousness, it's just an easy way to reframe that in a way that everybody could understand is what master metaphors do we live by? And in a typical business setting, it is optimized to run efficiently like a machine. You dial this way and that, optimize the costs, maximize the profit, efficiency, blah, blah, blah. It's like running a factory. You got all these dials and you're trying to fine tune that constantly, get the most out of that. That is a very mechanical, materialistic, reductionist viewpoint. And that is the metaphor through which we look at business. Or even sometimes our careers and our life, like bits and pieces that you could assemble in like A to B to C to D. But what I realized at the gathering is that, oh my God, I hadn't realized that because anything that we do, anything we understand, anything we communicate through metaphors, right? Atoms are not really billiard balls. And these are all metaphors through which, and I thought what I realized sitting around that campfire is like, this is very primal. This is what we used to do for hundreds of thousands of years. These gather around the fire and pass the talking stick, so to speak, and share stories. And then I realized, what if we could look at business from an through ecological metaphors? You can't force anybody to do anything. You can with the right sticks and carrots, but how long does that last before that person burns out as a cog, you know? But if you nurture somebody for who they are and improve them, then it's like gardening. You can't make a plant grow in a certain shape or how fast, but you can nurture it so it could become the best that it can be. And so that's the realization that I had. So, how do you look at problems or solutions from a different level? Very possibly by just looking at it through different metaphors. It's trying to see it from a slightly different framing. And that has lent, I'm by nature a generalist. They say jack of all trades, master of none. But I realized earlier on, it's better than being a master of one. It's usually the people who can connect the dots, fly high enough and long enough to see the dots that can connect that the specialist cannot look at. And only way really to do that is to see things from a vantage point that is outside your typical realm. And if you're curious about something, then you go out and explore that and learn, and meet people. I'm really looking forward to next week. I'm going to go meet Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the WWW World Wide
No
Web.
way.
And I've got some questions for him. And they're having this. He's written a book, but when I'm interested in something, I dig deep and I contact the people, and it may just be, just shaking a hand or just being there in person when they're speaking. But if you do enough of that, you start to see kind of a web of interconnectedness among so many different disciplines that could aid insights into the very field that you're doing. And so I think challenging a different level of consciousness, you don't have to go into a spiritual mode or a philosophical mode. It's just like, hold on a second, what kind of master metaphor am I living by, working by? And I realized at that gathering, I've been living under a very mechanical way of looking at how to run a business for so long. I thought that was the only way and the right way. And I realized if you look at all the successes and all of my good friends that I still keep in touch with, the human element in that had a lot more to do with being less mechanical about our duties and our objectives. There was a human element, and that I think that is something that is worth cherishing. And I think many of us, when we have reaped the fruits of our hard work, we want to get ourselves back in a place where we can excel in an area where we can nurture others, to be nurtured by others, rather than going back into a mechanical system as a cog, no matter if it's a very important cog. And so, yeah, I think that is very important to be able to see from a slightly different vantage point.
I really like that. I like there's two things in that. Well, I've got a few questions, but one is, do you think is that one of the myths that or the illusions, that metaphor, that master metaphor of like, oh, we're here to optimize the machine? If the word optimize is the one that jumps out at me there, like that that there's an end goal, like that there is a place you can get to where everything is optimized. And I'm wondering, is that like one of the things that we have to just think about our listeners and everything else would be, is that one of the kind of illusions that you see, that if people could let go of it and if they were not to optimize, what do you think would open up for them?
You know, uh, optimizing things is not negative. It's what are you optimizing for? That's what's important. And you can be very mechanically minded. And I think uh, you can be very focused on wanting to achieve certain things. That's not a problem. But when you're constantly optimizing things without a sense of balance, a sense of values, then before long, there's going to be so much cognitive dissonance in your head that you're going to fall out. You're not going to be passionate anymore. You're going to feel burnt out. And you're doing it for a paycheck, you're doing it for a reward. And, Jonathan Davis, my co founding partner, passing away in June, only amplified some of the thoughts that I had that life is very short. Do you want to? I mean, life is such an incredible, miraculous gift that we exist for a certain time in the universe. Do we want to spend that, going from paycheck to paycheck? Is that the best way? Or do we want to do things that have meaning that allows us to be a part of a community, part of a family, and do some good in the world? And you can do that. I think corporate structures often is the best way to get things done. And I would never poo poo that. But how is it guided? What are the various metaphors that we could integrate with that? And I think that is the kind of challenge. You don't have to do any of that. You'll be perfectly fine if you go into a job and perform. They'll be happy. They'll promote you. But are you going to be happy? Is that ultimately serving a bigger purpose? Is something that I think people have to question. Hopefully before the latter part of their career. Hopefully earlier the better.
I mean, Jet, when you talk about your career and some of the things that you've done, you strike me as somebody who has. It sounds like you've loved a lot of what you've been involved in, and you've followed your curiosity. From that first party that you attended in Hong Kong, where you met that exec, and that sort of set you on a path. But have you sort of been somebody who has, for the most part, fallen back on your wisdom, or when you sort of cast your view back on things, or how has that evolved?
Um, I mean, I'm far from being wise. I am still. I usually describe my career trajectory as I stumbled. I stumbled onto things, and I was very fortunate to. And I'm still stumbling into things, but it's more uh, discerning, more considered, and and I think um, in the way, for example, way I try and coach my children, I don't want them to go through a formulaic a pathway to success. I want them to go on their own journey, and things will happen. And my son, for example, uh, very poor student, just like his dad in high school. Didn't decided not to go to college. Joined the military. He uh, held out until he got a positioning in with the intelligence, and then he came out and went straight away into community college. But I don't know what happened, but he got 4.0 and he got a scholarship. Then he got accepted to Columbia afterwards. And all of his friends are fuming because he was the poorest student amongst them all. And so now he's in New York and, studying the things that he wants to study. And I said, well done, because you followed your heart. We weren't like tiger mom and dads, like typical Asians. And so I feel like there's no one way to get to anywhere. But if you follow your heart, stay true to who you are, whether it's following the conventional pathway, that's perfectly fine and respectable. But some people, that's not for them. And you have to kind of feel your way around. But with the right kind of heart, intellect, and compass, you'll get there. But you just can't connect the dots until afterwards. And so I feel like that's how it's been for me. I'm now more moderated, but what I try to do is, how do I manage my team, my scientists, in a way that there is maximum autonomy and also maximum collaboration, and they can push the limits without feeling pushed per se. And so that's always tricky. How do you nurture something like that? And so it's an ongoing process, and that will never end. There's no somebody could write a book on how to do it, and they'll probably become very rich. But it's just one thing I learned some time back is it's kind of blew my mind, and I was really interested in physics, so I read Werner Heisenberg's Physics and Philosophy, which I've heard of for 2 decades, but I never got to it because I felt intimidated. This is for physicists to read, not for me, especially such a giant like him. I'll never be able to understand any of it. But finally, I decided to get it and read it, and I realized, oh my God, this is like bathroom reading. This is easy read because he wrote it in a way for non-scientists, and it just blew my mind and made me help me to understand physics in a way that I couldn't understand it in university or in high school. And part of that is the idea that relationship comes before the relata. That is, relationship is a what they call an ontological primitive. So people think, okay, here's me, here's a chair, and then we have a relationship. That's something I sit on. No, what physics and what philosophers are saying, some philosophers are saying is, no, no, no. It's the relationship defines what a thing is. So I thought about that. And I thought, hold on a second, who am I? I'm so and so's father, so and so husband, so and so's friend. I'm a bundle of relations. Without any of these relations, I'm nothing. And I realized, oh my God, it's the how we establish and nurture relationship. That is the primitive. That is more important than the things that we relate to or the persons that we relate to, the relationship. And so I think I want to try and nurture that in our team, and our relationships span much broader than polymer chemists. It goes to engineers. Even where I learned that relationship comes before relata. I learned it from a philosopher, neuroscientist named Ian McGilchrist. who I met on the streets by chance. One of the benefits of living in Oxford is sometimes there are celebrity sightings, and like if you're like me, I go up and say hello and I talk to them about the books I've read, and so anyway, it's just being open to relationships and taking that to wherever it may go. And anytime I needed a relationship because I needed something, it usually doesn't go very well, or it feels very forced. But when you're open minded, inevitably, some you repel, some you attract. And that develops into something. And if it's a relationship across a number of stakeholders, things happen that otherwise could never have been possible. And so allowing something like that to chance, but also to capitalize on it when it is possible, I think it's something that you really can't write a manual for. You just kind of have to go with your instinct, kind of flow with it, so to speak, to see where it goes.
If you think about your Uber binder journey, and the incredibly complex uh, nature of reverse vulcanization and trying to uh, manipulate this polymer in a way that it will serve the vision, and the way in which you've had to cajole and experiment and be curious in a very open-minded way, and the way that you've instinctively almost pulled experts from around the world who probably weren't even familiar with each other's work. And you're a very small team. Just so the listeners are aware, we're not talking like an army of people here. This is a very resource constrained team. But what you've managed to do so artfully is pull in these experts uh, from around the world, found centers, two centers in particular, one in Arizona, one in Liverpool, England, these centers of excellence for the types of domain expertise that you've become increasingly curious about, and you've stitched together this wonderful community, and there is a real sense of connectedness. I mean, when I hang out with you and I meet these individuals at these conferences or at your unveiling event, you can just see like you have very, it seems effortless, but you're like conducting an orchestra, but you're doing it in a very fluid, enjoyable. It looks like you're having a lot of fun doing it, but you're conducting an orchestra and you're doing it through influence, because none of these people report to you. Very few of them do. But you have this team that you've built, and they are all marching to your tune, and you seem to take great delight in sitting back and watching it all happen. And it seems effortless. And so I'm just wondering if you see what I'm seeing, or if you sense what I'm seeing, because from my vantage point, and I'm sure Al will echo this, based on his meeting you in New Hampshire, is you seem to have a lot of faith. You have a lot of faith in the way the universe works, even if you don't fully have the vernacular to articulate how it works.
Yeah. Well, before Jonathan passed, we uh, conversed a lot about non-work areas. And he sent me from the book of Tao Te Ching, I remember chapter 64, and I can't remember the whole long bit, but what the Tao Te Ching said, the part that I remember is that it says, rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. He was trying to remind me, before he passed away, don't force a thing too much because you've got to let it happen, but then you've got to nurture the environment so that things will happen quickly. And so these are the kind of conversations that we used to have. And I can barely get my kids to do anything. How am I going to get, these experts with the degrees, advanced degrees in different parts of the world with decades of experience to do anything that they don't want to do? Only way to do that is to connect with them, build rapport as human beings, and then to float the vision that they may start to latch onto. And once they start to share your vision and realize that it's not something I can do on my own or they can do on their own, or maybe even the stakeholders can do on their own, they realize we're going to have to basically create a small village, a small ecosystem to get this thing started. Then all of a sudden it becomes a very exciting project that they can bring their expertise into doing something new. Regarding inverse volcanization, what is really exciting is in the history of the cosmos, these sets of molecules have never existed before. These are artificially created molecules that uses natural sulfur and fatty acids from animals and plants. We figured out the technology of cross-linking them through this inverse volcanization process. Now, how do we manufacture this in a cost-effective way across different regions in the world? There still get the unit economics right, get people to trial this, take risk and trial this. There's still plenty to do, but we are a frontier technology, and this is one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved in. And so it is the same for our polymer chemists or for engineers that we work with. Once they understand the ramification of what this could represent, then it really excites them. And I really don't have to do too much other than just to make sure that, you mentioned a conductor. There is a conductor from the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra who retired and became a management consultant. And because he used to be a conductor, he teaches executives how to conduct their management team. And some are like doing Mozart in a German style. And, people resign in droves because the conductor makes them lose their passion for music. And then some, like Leonard Bernstein, is just amazing. So there's many different styles. And he has one of the 10 commandments of conducting, like never look at the trombone player. It only encourages them. So, but ultimately, he wants to find harmony among disparate parts. And I think that is, again, going back to master metaphors, such a better metaphor than a military commander that commands respect and tells you what to do. And if you don't do it, then there's this whole rank and file system that's going to be. I think it's so much more motivating. This other way of managing.
Um, like I just there's so much in that that I adore. The question that I had before, and it's still in my mind. Do you know when I met you in New Hampshire, and it's like this is such a joy to be back here. Like the the threads that you are able to pull on to tell a story, it blows my mind. Like just kind of the different things that you know, like you pulled on physics and the Dao, I can't pronounce it,
Tao De
the
Jing.
Dao De Jing, and then talking about composers and conductors, and I just love it because actually I think it links back to the quote that you talked about at the beginning about different levels of consciousness. So what I'm curious about is, were you always like this, from when you were young? And the word that's in my head is so deeply curious about everything. Like, was it something that's always been there? Was there a transition, any transitions in your life where you go, yeah, like actually I started to see the world differently? I'm really curious. I'm curious because it's striking me that curiosity is one of the keys to change.
To be fair, I'm not curious about everything. In fact, I get really bored with a lot of things, even if it should be fascinating. But then sometimes I latch onto things that fascinate me, then I go fast. And so thus, when I was growing up, they didn't have anything called what is a attention deficit hyper or something ADHD. I'm probably one of those because if I couldn't be interested in it, no matter how important it was, I would disregard it. But then I would go from one interest to another. Even though I'm criticized for it, I know that it's important, it's valuable. And sometimes it's valuable 5 years later because I could. And funny thing is, all these areas, I get them from you guys too. For example, uh, Mark, you shared with me last year a book by Isabella Tree called Wilding. And boy, I just read that and I saw the documentary. I was just fascinated. And soon after, I saw documentaries about mycelium, a fungi, the web of life. And the reason that fascinates me because that is a model to learn by, how to manage a system. Do you force it or do you let it do its thing by letting it aggregate just in the right way or not getting in the way? And I feel like you could learn a lot from nature. And so I'm getting a lot of these inspirations from things that you might have just casually tossed my direction. I go, whoa, this is fascinating because it's already very well curated by the time you've mentioned something like that. So I have that kind of source here and there. And like everybody else, I've got, many, many books I meant to read. I still haven't touched yet, unfortunately. But there are some that I do read, and it just fundamentally shifts my level of consciousness to yet another notch, then another notch. And then every once in a while informs the way I do things or I should do things. And so it's like having a constant advisor or friend that's informing me, Jet, reflect on this, think about it this way. And so it's always been very helpful.
Just that following, what I hear in that, Jet, is yeah, you're not curious about everything, but you follow your natural curiosity, and it's taken you on to incredible places and allowed you to see incredible things. And I don't mean see out. Also, I'm also talking about see internally. Um, and I'm just reflecting on something, so I wanted to share it and see if it kind of see what you guys say because that piece you said at the beginning, you can solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. And I realize that, often for me, you see something as a problem. And actually the seeing something as a problem perhaps is a problem in itself. Because then you become like super dialed in, like this is a problem, and therefore I have got to focus on solving this problem, which means you have created it as a problem in the first place, and now because you're very attached to that idea, you're trying to solve it, but you're trapped on that plane of consciousness by virtue of that very thing. But when you take what I heard there, which is in a few different ways saying the key to everything is to not try and force. Like force doesn't work the way that we think it is. But as soon as we identify something as a problem, we almost end up forcing ourselves into it because the natural conclusion is if it's a problem, it's there to be solved. But what I hear is like when you let go of the idea that it's even a problem and allow yourself to be taken just off in whatever direction you want to go, that in itself is the key to finding a new vantage point because you could be sitting on the toilet reading a physics journal and all of a sudden the thing that you thought was a problem just doesn't look like a problem anymore.
Yeah. That's precisely why some people uh, achieve kind of meditative states when they're walking, when they're sitting, when they're on the toilet, showering, because they're not forcefully trying to think of anything. And they're just being who they are. And, insights come. Uh, I told you about meeting Dr. Ian McGilchrist at Oxford. There's something because he's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist. He says that hyper rationality is the root cause of psychosis and schizophrenia. And I thought, what does that even mean? And so what it is when you over rationalize things, it gets you into a lot of trouble. And he made a example of somebody with schizophrenia. He heard a voice in his head. Clearly, it came from somewhere in the room, but there's nowhere the sound could have come from except for that light socket because there's a kind of a cavity there. So that makes sense. And if it came from the light socket, it must be my next door neighbor because that's the only reasonable. And then you get on a hyper rational, slippery slope. And so sometimes, again, going to a mechanical model of how businesses run, sometimes it's wound really tight with hyper rationality. And that's why you get the psychosis of it. Sometimes don't rationalize, just step back and feel the intrinsic, feel it with your intuition. You can't put a finger on intuition per se, but you have to trust your gut feel sometimes to say, is this a little bit off? Does this feel right? Don't overthink it. Sometimes let go and just go with the flow, so to speak, and then it will guide you in many instances.
I called up that Tao Te Ching, the chapter 64, and it's in the final stanza. It says, you know, therefore the sage seeks freedom from desire. He does not collect precious things. He learns not to hold on to ideas. He brings men back to what they have lost. But this is the killer line, I think. He helps the 10,000 things find their own nature, but refrains from action. And I think that's exactly what you're pointing to, Jet. I think it's perfect. Yeah.
So my question to you both is a very simple one. Is there any such thing as a problem?
I will give you another quote from the movie Matrix. When one of the programs at the train station says, "Because I love my daughter," and Neo goes, "Love? I didn't realize programs loved," and he says, "It's just a word. It's what it is. It's what's important is what that word implies." So, a problem is just a word. So, what are you implying? Is there something that needs to be fixed, changed? And so I think uh, not. Uh, I don't want to. Okay, I have to say this because this is my kind of a spectrum thing. So when I remember references, I have to say it. Alfred North Whitehead, in his process philosophy, he talks about certain fallacies, and one of the fallacies is called the fallacy of the perfect dictionary, because words are needed to describe and explain words. And so it's an infinite loop. But if you think that those words on its own have its own meaning without context, you're crazy. You'll never get there. So, what do you mean by problem? In what context is it a problem? Is it not profitable enough? Or is it not sustainable enough? Is it, I think the context is very important. Context gives the word problem meaning. So you have to be again, cast a wider boundary lens and challenge yourself. In what way is that a problem? Is probably a better way to try and find a solution.
I'm interested, Bill, just to hear your take as well. Before, like, I'm just
Yeah,
curious to
well,
add
I mean,
your insight.
this won't surprise you, I guess. But if you sort of come at it from more of a Taoist Buddhist approach, uh, problems only exist if there's resistance. And so when you step back, kind of to what Jet has been saying, when you step back and you allow the 10,000 things to find their own nature and you stop resisting, then you probably only see opportunities. You don't see what we traditionally call problems. Well, no, well, a very simple example is if a if a tree falls across a path, some people will see that as an impediment to making their journey, whereas others will see it as a massive opportunity to harvest wood or you know build a canoe or like whatever. And so it is that come from, it is the, oh, this has been provided versus, oh my gosh, this has been thrown in my path.
That's absolutely true, and ties in with Al, what you were asking. I think how we attend to problems, how we attend to anything, decides what we see and how we see. So, if you got a very fancy zoom lens camera around your neck as you walk through the forest, where you look at things is going to be different than whether you're walking through a forest with a chainsaw, whether you use it or not. What you're looking at is going to differ. How you look at things is going to differ. And so I think it's constantly training ourselves to attend to things in a certain kind of a way instead of in a fixated, mechanical kind of way. That would help us to see solutions and problems and vice versa.
Mm. Well, thank you both. Like, it to me, like this has been, it's just such a cool conversation because it all comes back to that, to me, to that fundamental, I guess, first principle that we all talk about, that our experience is coming from the inside, it's not coming from the outside. And we've talked forever about that that kind of metaphor of the closed fist and the open hand.
I love that.
And really, again, like that's what it comes back to me. It's like, and what you said there, Jet. It's not it's not so much, it's what vantage point you're looking at something, but it's the where you're almost off track is the feeling of it. Oh, this is a problem, and like we're attached to the idea that it's a problem because we think the world should that something should be different to how it is, versus seeing something and being like, "Oh, this is interesting." Like, there's something here. There's something here to engage with. Um, but as you said it, it's that come from. But that's what I think the question came up for me. Is there any such thing as a problem? And it's really like it's only a problem in the way that I think we're conditioned to believe that what problems are that get in the way, which is the 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 illusory problems are the ones that you think shouldn't be the way that they are, versus coming from acceptance that everything's exactly how it's meant to be. The tree was meant to fall on the path. Roads were meant to be built in the way that they were built. And the tree can be removed from the path and be converted into a canoe. Roads can be built in a different way. And it's not because there's anything wrong, it's just because we're seeing new possibility. And and that to me is that level, like that's the shift in consciousness almost comes from the acceptance of what is, and opening up to the possibility of what's yet to come, and being able to live in that space between what is and what is yet to be, and to know that that's kind of the nature of our experience. And I think I was saying to you, Jet, just before we came on, like I've gotten back into the world of work. Not that I've not been working, but in a company, and I'm experiencing myself seeing things, like getting attached to the idea that things are a problem and they need to be different. And then, like this week in particular, I felt myself relax back out of that. And this conversation is really helping me to kind of just see the truth of that again. Of like, oh, everything's exactly how it's meant to be. And the more accepting we are of that, the more we get to see about the possibilities that live in everything. So thank you for that. Like, I'm not saying that, but just that's, I wanted to share that because I think that brings me back to the simplicity of what's on offer for everyone. And um, it's almost seems too simple to be true. What? I just have to accept things the way they are and relax and not try and force anything, and then who knows what will emerge from there. That's what I'm taking away from this. And it's like, yep, it's that simple. and
Mhm, mhm.
and it's
As long as people don't mistake accepting things as being a passive observer. We are participants in it, and in terms of uh, recently I started a fitness program, and because rigor mortis has set into certain parts of my muscles that haven't worked out properly in a long time. And so I want to be more flexible, more agile. And similarly, I think the way we think, we we don't have to learn any of this. We are already like that. Imagine when we were children, we are very divergent thinkers. There's so much neuroplasticity, there's so much playfulness there. And we have, through schooling and through work life experiences, have our neural muscles have become more and more rigid now that you get cramps if you have to think a little bit differently. And so I think we have to, it's not about training to think a certain way or from a certain level of consciousness. I think it's entirely the opposite. We have to kind of unlearn a lot of things, realize there are things to be unlearned. And I think that takes, you have to go through some thinking and walking to realize some of that. I think, it's like the diet, programs, eat this and you'll get slimmer. It's not about eating diet food to make yourself, it's how you live your life in overall balance. So similarly, I don't think there's any fixes to be more in tune with your intuitive self, but it's to remove some of the obstacles that's preventing you from doing so, and go back to who you are, how you were.
Yeah, well said. Well, Jed, that feels like a. I think that feels. I don't know about you, but that feels like a kind of a natural point. As always, Jed, like from when we met you in New Hampshire, when I met you for the first time in New Hampshire, Billis has known you longer than I have. I could genuinely just keep chatting for ages, and hopefully we'll have you back on again. But given our conversation, I don't know if you're probably aware of our little closing tradition, but we always invite our guests to create their bumper sticker for life. So if Jet Yang could create his bumper sticker for life, what would it say and why?
Well, it depends what kind of font sizes I could use. But given that I started with Einstein quote, maybe my bumper sticker would be yet another Einstein quote, that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. So uh, the whole idea is we need to treasure our intuitive mind and nurture that instead of over relying on the rational mind. That could get us into trouble.
Nice. Love that. That's cool. Great reminder. Jet, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom. Like I said, I had the pleasure of that in New Hampshire, and you dropped so much. You share it. So I said this before, like you share it so beautifully. I just love how you bring all these different little nuggets together to then open up my awareness to see something more deeply. It's like you're pulling the petal, you're opening the petals on a flower just for me, and I'm like, oh wow, there it is in the middle. Um, so thank you for what you're doing in the world. Like, we can talk about levels of consciousness and trying to solve problems, not trying to solve the problems from the same level of consciousness. Like you're doing that in a remarkable way. I think I would imagine there's many listeners who are like me, just going, like, how does someone even get themselves to the point where they can see that possibility and then not only see the possibility, but jump into it wholeheartedly and say, well, I don't know how this is going to pan out, but I'm gonna have a lot of fun seeing if I seeing how much good I can do for this world we live in. So thank you for that as well, my friend, because it's
You
very
guys are much
inspirational.
too modest. I get a lot of those prompts from you guys. So thank you very much. And it's such a pleasure speaking with you both. And also, I feel like I owe you guys something because of that Live Into Your Brilliance Founders Gathering was such an amazing experience. And over the last 30 years, I've done my share of offsite meetings, but this was different. The caliber of the people there, And the fact that you didn't really force any agenda on any of us. You just set us on a trajectory where we could be ourselves. And the fact that we sat around a campfire, we floated on the lake together, sipping good beer, just talking, it was just really amazing. And in particular, something had been brewing inside my heart and head for well over 2 decades, and I was able to articulate exactly what that was during that offsite. So I owe you guys a really big one.
Thank you for saying that, my friend. But the truth is, you owe us nothing. Um, but we were glad to be there when it happened, and we're delighted to have you on the show today.
Well, listen, that's another wrap. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. You've got to cherish the Jett goodness. And you know what? If you think you got a problem, just take that step back and allow nature to do its trick. And as always, until we're with you again, go forth and live into your brilliance.